Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, and it's also uploaded as a YouTube video under the channel of Zenitsu, while also being up on various podcasting platforms like Spotify for your viewing and listening pleasure. Today, I'm with my co-host, Teddy, and we're going to be talking a little bit off topic as far as just talking more in general about TCGs, about the three kinds of TCG enthusiasts, as well as where we go to get our resources and information when we're going to be trying to look at what we need to for the Digimon TCG more specifically. So, as far as meta developments go, we did get a little bit of a surprise between the core TCG regional and the Latin American regional. As far as the majority of top 16, it's nothing we haven't really seen a whole lot of before. Just going over it really quickly for Latin American, because it actually was a pretty sizable event, which is definitely nice to see. They had 227 players, 7 rounds of Swiss. Starter deck 15 and 16 were both legal. And as a result, first place was Beelzemon X, so good to see Beelzemon still doing well. Second place was Greymon, more specifically Black War Greymon. Third place was Shine. Fourth place was Black War Greymon. Fifth place was Black War OTK, so it's not your usual, traditional red-black Greymon that both War Grey and Black Grey uses. This is the more OTK variant, and it seems like this is probably just the best OTK deck, more so than Dorpikmon, which is definitely interesting to think about. Then 6th place, we have Bloomlord. 7th place, we have Red-Black Greymon, Black War Greymon more specifically. 8th place, we have Shine. 9th place, we have Shine. 10th place, we actually do have a resurgence and comeback of Metal Garurumon. So that's the big shakeup. 11th place, we had Merva. Merva actually took another top. I thought it was probably just going to be a one and done. I guess I was wrong. And it's still doing well. 12th place is Red Hybrid. 13th is Belphemon. 14th is Red-Black Greymon. More specifically, Black War Grey X. 15th place was Royal Knights, and 16th place was Red Hybrid. So that was the Latin American regionals. So I'm pretty sure everyone is curious on what the heck Metal Garurumon is doing. And it isn't your purple-based Metal Garurumon, but it is still the same good old blue-based Metal Garurumon that we have came to know and love. So, Teddy, if you want to talk more about this variant of the deck and what kind of changed between then, when we initially had it, and now, and why it could possibly do better now because of these new tools.
So, of course, not very much has changed with this deck. It really is just the addition of the purple level 5, purple level 6, which the purple level 5 essentially is the old one, but it doesn't have security attack plus, instead foregoing that extra aggression for a means to have more removal. So instead of focusing just on, I'm going to OTK you, which it probably can still do, just it requires a lot more effort. But it still hits you pretty hard, really quickly. The goal is just to hit you with the level 5 Wereguru that does unsuspend normal, just like the old one. Still has all the battle protection. And then you can either leave it as the level 5 or go into the Metal Guru Ace. It essentially is a free Evo, even on your turn, because you just trash 3 cards, gain the 3 memory, go into Metal Guru X, unsuspend, get another swing. If you have an Omni, go for another one. I mean, it's the same old tried and true Metal Guru, but in addition to having extra removal, and I guess the option to play on your opponent's turn, which that can matter. They can choke you to 1, then you try and do something. If you make the mistake of attacking, they Metal Guru Ace, and then your turn is effectively over. It's just another way to play it, and it still does the same things, but now has more options. So it's pretty cool. I like it a lot.
And I think that just the difference in the removal tech definitely gives the deck more legs than it had already, just because not everything has bounce protection and not everything has removal protection. And as you said before, just going up into your Wergurumon X antibody after your Wergurumons are swinging twice, leaving that open for the potential ace, because it's going to be really hard to swing into the Digimon to be able to delete it, because that's Wergurumon's whole shtick, does make the ace a little bit more usable. And it just has, the same old goodness that we have been playing. I think in order for the deck to actually OTK, you do need to use Omnimon and Omnimon X, because if you swing twice with the Wergurumon, swing once with Wergurumon X, swing once with Metal Gurumon X, then swing once with Omni, that's only 5 checks. So on that 5th check, you do have to Omni X, and then that leads to game. So it still can OTK, like you said, just a lot more work. But the deck hasn't really changed outside of just that. They just are using Metal Ace and Wergurumon, and it's the same old goodness.
To be fair, it doesn't really need to change. It still does
No,
effectively what it wants to do.
yeah, it doesn't really need to change. And it definitely, it is unfortunate that I think that because of the limitations that are going to be in effect, it does make a purple base just not super ideal. And
Yeah,
I
I
think
just killed
that's
that whole idea.
I think that's fine, just because like the blue base is still pretty good, and it could still put up results, as we can see, even though it hasn't gotten a whole lot of new tools as of right now. Soon to change as of EX5, but that's way into the future. I just want to take a quick look at the Merva deck. And by quick look, I just mean mention it. Because the Merva deck actually has and is using a copy of Metal Gurumon. This is the purple ace one. Just because it's like Mervamon can bring back level 4s super easily. You could Digivolve into a level 5, end your turn on that level 5, and then if they think about swinging, then you just ace and, again, just kind of end their turn. It is running Nidhogg's for discard fodder. It is just a pretty interesting Merva list that is more focused on retaliation and discard synergy than some of the other Merva lists before, which I think is fine, because Merva is a highly versatile and flexible card, and obviously it did the player very well, having lots of unique tech cards like Neo Devimon just to hose on some Tamer hate, just because there's a lot of really strong and powerful Tamer-based decks. It's using the Matt Ishida from the starter deck as another way to generate memory on the opponent's turn if you're going to be discarding during the opponent's turn, which you would be with Metal Gurumon Ace. It's a fine deck. It is a fine deck. A little hard to pilot at times, but that's just purple in a nutshell for the most part. So I guess that brings us to Core TCG. So Core TCG was a maxed out event at 512, which is always good to see that the competitive side of things, like, we still can hit pretty high numbers. We dipped down for a bit in terms of attendance, but it's nice to see that we could still hit these high numbers. As far as the top 16 breakdown, again, nothing really new has broken into the meta outside of the fact that a Metal Gurumon, both in Latin American and in the US, has made it into the top 16, which is pretty nice. Everything else we've kind of seen before. The only trade-offs it really seems like is we're down a Merva for North America, and we're up a security control, and then the top 16s are pretty identical. I think that Cores had a little bit of a better spread, but they're both pretty spread out as is. Because they both have a Black War Greymon OTK, they both had a Mirage, they both had one off deck. Oh, there was a Mirage. I totally forgot.
There was one Mirage there.
Yeah, there was a Mirage. I totally forgot. Mirage was actually still a playable deck for now. It has its consistency issues, but it does do a lot of really powerful things. So let's just go over the 8 rounds top 16 breakdown before we get into the Mirage and talk a little bit more about Metal Garurumon. So, first place was Shine, second place was Royal Knights, third place was Blue Flare, fourth place was Red Black Greymon, more focused on Black War Grey X. I think at this point, just Black War Grey X is the de facto one, just because it has better tools. People are toolboxing the deck anyway, and it really needs the Tamer hate for the current environment. So I think, like, going forward, we're probably just going to see a lot more Black War X's. Even as of BT14, it still seems like Black War X is going to trump War Greymon, which is not necessarily a bad thing, just because the deck has already so much toolboxing potential. But fifth place is Blue Flare, sixth place is Royal Knight, seventh place is Black War Greymon X, eighth place is Black War Grey OTK, ninth place is Bloomlord, 10th place is Belphamon, 11th is Belphamon, 12th is Mirage, 13th was Royal Knights, 14th Shine, 15th Metal Garurumon, and 16th Security Control. So that is that top 16 breakdown. We could hit on the Metal Garurumon deck first, just because there is a ever so slight change between the Latin American list and the North American list. Do you want to go over what that is?
Yeah. So the besides the cool one, they are running one more Metal Garurumon Ace, and then they're also running Omnimon Alter B in foregoing the extra copy of Omnimon X, which is pretty cool. I do like it a lot for the big high roll of being able to, if you do have all three level 6 sources, which you can do. It just requires, or level 6 and above sources. You can do, it just requires a bit of setup, which then allows them to nuke Digimon Tamers or Tamers. So that's pretty cool. Of the lowest play cost of each card trash. So that's dope. Being able to nuke a bunch of Tamers if they have no board. That's pretty cool. Other than that, it's essentially the same exact list with a few honorable mentions to Great Maelstrom, because the other deck wasn't running any removal options particularly. This one is running the one. So it has a few tech cards. The D-Digivolve 3, also an Omnimon Alter B, matters quite a bit into a lot of matchups. So I dig it. It can catch people off guard, and I'm sure that's exactly why the person was using it.
Yeah, they were also running one less Weregurumon X and playing a Sagittarius mode, just for, more inheritables building and extra protection. The bounce effect is also kind of nice. It doesn't come up a whole lot, but it still can, depending on the matchup. And Great Maelstrom, I actually really enjoy as a tech card for removal for this deck more specifically, just because you actually care about your inheritables and multiple levels of your inheritables. So if you you could try to use Great Maelstrom to try to build upon your inheritables a little bit more, and I think that's pretty cool. Alter B, I think, is a very interesting tech choice, because they're still running the purple level 5 and the purple level 6. I think if you're playing Metal Garurumon, that's just the only way the deck can change right now without taking a huge consistency boost. And it's interesting that Omnimon Alter B is only able to Digivolve in the deck on top of an Omnimon, which I think, like, the BT5 Omnimon is an absolutely insanely good card to just leave out if you're just trying to apply lots of pressure, just because between his native protection, which nobody uses, this is actually a good way to use it to be able to not only have battle protection, but protection from being returned to the hand or bottom of the deck or deleted. So that's just a lot of different protections on that one card that you could get up to pretty easily. And then that just opens up the door for you to just Digivolve on top into Alter B to just continue to wreck the opponent's Nans and anti-tempo them. Or you could go up into Omnimon X, so you do have that flexibility on how you could use the Omnimon, especially since it is harder to OTK. I think the other deck was more focused on the OTK, and this is a little bit more tempo orientated, and I definitely am down for the slight variations in each of the decks, kind of changing how you're going to be approaching the same deck.
Yeah, I think this is super cool. I like when people try and do, fun innovations like this, and this is honestly this makes sense into a lot of matchups. The more I think about it, it is a tech card, and I'm sure that they are not looking to resolve this card every game. But there are games that this probably came up, and they were like, "Wow, this really helps me here." And it being a 2 cost Evo on any Omnimon is also really good. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I
you just
did
can't get rid of the Metal Gurumon Ace, otherwise you will be triggering the overflow.
unless you got the memory for it, you ain't using that effect.
Yeah, so I mean, you could theoretically go Omnimon, Omnimon X, Alter B to get around it, but I think by that point you already should be winning, so it's not
Oh
like
yeah,
you
if you're
actually
good
need to
against
go that
Omnimon X,
high.
that's probably game already.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
it's more of a win more card, I assume, but it this could definitely, I think, just shut down a matchup if they're like already ahead. Then this could just like make it impossible for your opponent to win.
yep.
So
Uh,
like it.
so I definitely like it. And if you're a Metal Gurumon enthusiast, uh, get some level fours or get some level fives, get some level sixes, and the deck virtually hasn't changed anything else outside of that. Maybe a couple of ratio tweaks here or there, but I think it's still a very strong deck, even in this current meta. There is a little bit more to counter it, just because Blackwell Greymon can shut its offense down, but it has to get there, and sometimes that's the struggle where Gurumon is a little bit more consistent because it's a blue deck, and because you're aggroing at a level 5 versus a level 6. That also is a huge change of pace, but I think it's a very decent deck for, in addition to the meta, thanks to the starter decks.
I think so too, and I think it's still at the end of the day can just outright steal games. Sometimes the opponent just doesn't have the way to win, doesn't have the out,
Yeah.
and the speed of it is still very good, and it only technically got back to where it was via the starter decks. So
Uh,
I
s-
agree.
Speaking of speed, one thing that I do want to touch on is the Mirage deck, just because we haven't really seen a whole lot of Mirage, especially in the later half of BT13. And I think Mirage is still a very powerful deck. It's just a little on the risky, high rolly side because it does fall into that like glass cannon territory.
Yeah,
But some of the tech choices that this player has been using seems very, very interesting.
uh,
Um,
dig the Jerry's, the Leomon tech.
Yeah, the Leomon tech is obviously going to be the biggest thing just because Leomon has absolutely nothing to do with the deck as is. It just gives it a little bit more annoying survivability, so to speak, and a little bit more draw power, so that way you could try to see your parts and pieces a little bit more consistently. They are also, instead of using the BT13 Mach Gao, they're running the BT11 Mach Gao again for that DP boost and the blocker ability for either offensive or defensive capabilities, rather than go full Unga Bunga offense because they are not running the Nikolais. They're running the Jerrys instead of the Nikolais, which means they are running the Leomons instead of just whatever. And I think that's not incorrect, just because most of your level 4s kind of suck and you could do whatever you want with them. The only one you actually care about is the EX4 one, just because that could help you gain memory. And outside of that, it looks basically like a normal Mirage Galgamon deck, except for the Death X. I think like this kind of goes into where you could just splash into Death X, and then Death X can just do a lot of work, and it helps against specific matchups just because the D Digivolve, it's good against go wide fields, which this deck really kind of isn't. It is and it isn't. It's up to a certain point where you won't be able to deal with wide fields. So, like, Death X is just a very smart tech card to include. They're running both Full Moon and Sorai as removal cards. So they are just full on stall, remove until I combo and kill you. And I'm down for it, and I'm curious to see if this is going to be like the base build going forward, or because of the training boosts, we just cut out the Jerrys, we cut out the Leomons, and we just go full Unga Bunga?
See, I think this is just the way that the deck has to play for now until we get those trainings, because the trainings just turn this deck into a consistent monster. Also, lowering the cost of the evos, which is usually the crux of the deck, and turning those big evo costs into surpluses matters quite a bit. So I think for now, one, I like this. Just out the gate, I like this a lot because the Leomons give your opponent a decision. They have to make a decision. Do I want to deal with this, or do I want to just leave it on the board and let him chip and then get even more value on his turns? So I like this. This makes sense to me. Death X is I'm 50-50. It's an okay card. It's not bad. It's the spice card that everybody likes to throw in. I think this helps against those decks that go wider, or like Crossheart and things like that, or
Hunters.
yeah, Hunters and those decks. It makes sense. I don't mind it at all. Um, Sorai matters. It just comes up. Sometimes you just need that one turn to just say, no, you can't hurt me yet, or something of that nature. So I like it. There's really not much else to say until the trainings. I think this is fine. Something of this nature makes sense to me. Um, the especially them being risky, going 11 rookies. Not the biggest fan of that, especially in a deck like this at the current moment. But I think maybe the Leomons and the Jerrys, the draw power that they give you is enough. So maybe it's fine. I mean, clearly it worked for this person. Um,
Yeah. And before we get off of the meta, just because the majority of it really isn't changing, I do
no.
kind of just want to highlight the Black War Gray OTK
Okay.
variant, just
I was gonna say
because.
because I was like, this is cool. I really, really like both of their deck lists. The one from
Yeah,
the other one and this one.
well, I think like this goes into my philosophy with OTK decks, where I feel like OTK decks are always going to be viable as long as they A, have the consistency to see all of the parts and pieces when they need to, and B, the speed, as long as they could just kill the opponent before they actually have the ability to respond. I think like basically any deck that has the potential to OTK is already just up for the runnings to be just a very good deck. And I think because Black War Greymon is using the consistency pieces on the Agumon stuff and the consistency pieces on the X antibody stuff, it does propel the deck to be better than Dorbikmon, who is just using blanket draw instead of trying to hunt for specific pieces. And I think Dorbic is a little bit harder to build, let alone build fast enough. And not like build as in like actually build the deck, like build as in fill up your hand with the most meaningful cards. And I think Black War Gray X just squeaks it out just because it is easier to use because, Agumon and Greymon dot cards are all good. And it doesn't matter what you're actually using, especially in this deck, just because you're going to be throwing away most of your inheritables anyway. So the deck starts off really strong, hitting with Black War Grey X, and then it gets progressively weaker, but by that point, you should be in the
Killing
clear.
them.
Yeah, you should be in the clear to basically kill them. Um,
I will say, like the other ones, like cores and top cuts, those two Black War Gray OTK lists, those look fairly similar, and they follow that one philosophy of just that kill them. But if you look at the Latin American one, I really think this one's cool. Now this could just be the Bond player in me loving this because they're running like BT6 tie, the Bond tie, so that they can promote, get a bunch of memory draw power. They're also using the EX1 Skull Greymon, so they could swing 2, 3 checks depending on if they have the Greymon inheritable, then die, play an Agumon, search a few, potentially evolve into another like Agumon X. I dig this quite a bit. I think this is pretty cool. It looks pretty funny. And then of course the Chimeramon, but that's normal. Like that's always been there.
yeah,
But
there's some lists that don't run the Chimeramon, but I think like just the stack building potential of Chimeramon, having
Too
extra
important.
access at yellow for your blinding rays, it is just kind of too important for basically any deck to try to close out the game. Plus, you can make your inheritables like absolutely huge for Black or Greymon, which is
And,
obviously
yeah,
the most important thing.
and effectively turn it into a impossible to remove stack, or it just requires too much like specific, very very specific cards. So I or basically impossible to block or redirect or anything like that because you just swing so much. So I like it. I think this is cool. I really like the Latin America list a bit more, but that's just biased because I really
The
like the Skull Greymon.
the Latin American list, yeah, like I do like the Latin American list just because of the Bond Spice. Because you've really only seen both BT6 Tai and EX1 Skull Greymon only almost reserved in Bond lists specifically. And I'm almost sitting here thinking like, what if I just figure out a way to just run one Bond in this Black War
Yeah,
Greymon list? And I think like that would be so spicy to catch the
just
opponent
catch
off
them off
guard.
guard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just to be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna bond here.
swing,
What? Yeah, because like
delete
you could,
something, trash the security.
because if something goes wrong with Black War Greymon, which it could, they're running a delicate plan, so things kind of don't. But in case
Usually,
something
yeah.
does go wrong, like you could literally just put enough pressure and line up a bond play, and that sometimes is just good enough to close out games.
Yeah, because ideally you just swing at least 3, 4 checks with Black Ore, and then Bond can probably close up the game if you swing the 4 checks and you don't kill everything on the board.
Yeah, it
So
would have been nice to kind of see them run the EX1 Greymon to be able to put out a tie for free in
yeah,
case you're
spam the
trying to
ties.
aggress a little bit early. None of the lists are running it, so I guess I'm wrong
Missed
for wanting
opportunity.
to. It kind of
Uh,
is and it kind of isn't. Like it's a good card, but I think like based on
I
how the
think more
deck is,
often than not, they're not swinging with their level fives. So I think that's why. Like the level
yeah.
fives are just the bridge. So it makes sense why. But it'd be hilarious with like Black or Gray. You swing, unsuspend, play a tie, swing.
The funny
Suspend.
thing is, because of the Skull Greymon, it actually gives you 4 different colors for Chimeramon. I think the deck already allows you to use 4 colors because you have red, black,
Black,
white
yeah.
by default, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have yellow thanks to
Five
the
colors. Yeah.
BT12 Agumon that they generally run. And then
Yep.
with Skull Greymon, that's a 5th color. So in case you're off on a color and you do care about that Chimera removal effect, you have access to it, which is nice.
Yeah, and it's 5,000 too. That like if you were able to get like all 5 colors, that's 5,000 DP, man, or 5,000 DP on the entire or 4 of their bodies. That's pretty good.
That's almost their whole board, pretty much,
Yeah,
Digimon wise.
it's yeah. You're most likely hitting everything on the board because most people are not having unless you're playing, I guess, Bloom Lord or something of that nature that floods the board. But
Yeah,
not
I
very
just
many
wish
decks do that.
Black I wish Black could Digivolve on top of it, but that's for a later time, I guess.
One day,
It's what makes Black the promo from all the way back when BT4. It's technically a promo card, but it was released alongside of BT4.
yeah,
It makes
the
that
dash
card
pack,
fair and more kind of balanced, I guess.
sure.
Not having the named evolutions just because of when that card was made. Oh my god, if this deck had unrestricted like name evolutions, I think like that would be absolutely insane.
This would be borderline, probably the best OTK deck, if not, and it still probably is the best OTK deck, just because of the consistency.
Yeah, I don't think we have any like too many OTK decks left, like hardcore OTK decks that's 100% designed to OTK. It's basically like between this and Dorbrick. You could build Black War Gray to, or not Black War. You could build Raid War Greymon from BT12 to be OTK focused, but I think like just because the opponent can play around it, you shouldn't build your deck that way. It could, but I don't think that's reasonably likely to happen all that often anymore if the opponent can read the room.
Nah, you can play around it, so it makes like if they play into it, then yeah, you can kill them just instantly. But
Yeah.
more often than not, they don't.
Yeah, I think we don't have any like hardcore OTK decks left. I mean, Mirage kind of is.
Mirage, technically, I guess
Yeah,
that would
but
be
I think
one,
like
but
based on the
that requires a
results,
lot.
yeah, based on the results, like I think we've seen more Black War Gray than Mirages. If not, we've
I mean,
seen pretty
duh.
close to about the same number. So, who
I don't
knows?
know. I think there's definitely way more Blackboard than there are
I think at this
Mirage.
point there's more Black Wars. I'd have to go double check the numbers, but I think there is.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain there is, just unless you're counting like Ultimate Cups, but that's different.
Yeah,
But yeah.
I don't count Ultimate Cups. I'm looking at the hardcore competitive data.
Oh no, then it's just Blackwar. Then I know Blackwar. Even just looking at these three, there's only one Mirage out of these three, but every single one of them has Blackwar.
Yeah, he's been popping up more and more, and I know there has been a couple of Dorbic players running around that have been doing pretty decently well too.
Oh yeah,
Partially because of the new Gamamon stuff, and then partially because it is an OTK deck, and if they just get the nuts, they just win. So yeah, there's also that. Like that's just the magic of OTK decks, and why I always think that they're relevant and should never be discredited.
Dorpic got a slight buff actually. Randomly getting off topic there, just because of the unrestricted savior.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, it did get a
We
slight
can't
buff.
use that yet, but it'll definitely be interesting to see what the full scope of BT14 is going to look like, especially with the changes to our format versus Japanese format, which I don't think a whole lot of people actually talk too much about. Because everyone's just like, oh, go watch East or go look at CG guides and you'll know exactly what the Japanese meta is like. And I'm like, for English, we've had many instances where it is just different.
Which isn't necessarily wrong per se, but that's just you got to look at that as a snapshot. That's not really the full picture. They play dramatically different than we do, and we also have different cards. Period. Like than they will have, and
Yeah,
they
we
have.
get promos later and sometimes earlier than they do. So, promo cards that can matter based on how strong the promos are. So, we've had different formats, and this kind of goes into like the resources that we use in order
Mhm.
to look at the data that we are, trying to find to evaluate what we A, want to play, B, are going to be using, and C, what is the base or foundation for us to pick up from to see what we could possibly do to expand upon what the Japanese meta is. So this brings us to the resource department, which I think I use Digimon-CG-guide.com as one of the best sources for Japanese data. I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, but there's Digimon Meta. I don't like Digimon Meta. I don't like how they organize the data. And, like, I don't know. The website feels very sloppy to me. That's just me personally on why I don't use it and why I use CG guides. But like, if you're just looking at like very quick and rough stuff, then Meta is probably okay to use. They use the same information, which is why I like CG Guide better than Meta for Japanese data. And I believe East, one of the bigger YouTubers who covers the Japanese meta side of things, he uses CG Guide as well. And he also
Yes.
and they all grab it from Twitter or X at this point. Posted under a specific like hashtag.
Yeah, they use a specific hashtag, and then they all compile the lists, and then they throw it on that website.
Yeah,
Which
so if you know the hashtag, even Twitter is a good source
another
of
resource.
information. Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of agree. I use both because sometimes some will pop up on one and not the other. Just it just depends on whatever. I open them both most of the time, but more often than not, I'll use the other one, not Digimeta.
Yeah, I
Digimon
like
Clever.
Meta for the little articles that they write just
Yeah,
because that's something we don't see a whole lot is like
more
written
insightful.
articles on successful decks or like interviews with players outside of like a random YouTuber grabbing an interview just for clicks and views just because they could. Um
Yeah, I agree. I like when they do things like that, but I mean, it is what it is. I that is why I tend to lean towards I mean, more often than not, I am using just Digimon Card Meta 1 because it's just something I have bookmarked and then I don't have to go out of my way to look. But they do come with the same information for the most part. Just sometimes one has one, like another tournament or two over the other, just because whoever updated the website that day or something of that nature. You have to also remember these are fan made. These are not like run by Bandai or anything of that nature. So these are just out of the kindness of these people's hearts. They put them on websites. So it's very cool to support them if you can.
Yeah.
Um, um, but and you mentioned East. I do tend to look at his stuff quite a bit. That's also another great resource. YouTubers. There's quite a few YouTubers that you can look up. Wink, wink, Zenitsu, and all these other YouTubers that do Digimon content. There are some that maybe don't do the most informative, but they still do gameplay that lets you get insight on decks. It really just depends on what you're looking for specifically. But in our case, we're talking about the meta and things of that nature. What resources we use in that.
Yeah, I think like anyone who uses Digimon Meta, they're perfectly fine to do so. I'm not saying it's wrong. Digimon Meta over CG Guide also tries to incorporate more of the English meta as well.
Mm-hmm.
So like they have a section for Japanese meta and they have a section for English meta, and they cover a lot of the smaller English tournaments that are ran by various different people on Discord or IRL based on who actually submits that information. Most of the time, when it comes to like CG Guide and Meta, they only do like the first place deck or like first, second, or third. You don't get a whole lot of like top eights or top 16s most of the time, just because like the one thing I think that people don't necessarily 110% understand is all of these are based off of local data. Like this is somebody who won their locals and just posted the deck list on Twitter, and now here it is on Meta and CG Guide. And like I'm not saying that's not a good representation, because there's a lot of decks that get posted and compiled into this to have a good understanding on the direction. But in terms of like how well a deck actually performs hardcore in tournaments, you won't necessarily see that very often from these smaller scenes, just because during a small scene almost anything is technically viable, just because it only needs a few less opportunities to squeak out a win. Then there's player skill involved, where somebody at one locals could just be way more skilled than other people at a different locals. So there's just a lot of various factors to go in mind. So these aren't like end all be all guides. And I think like when it comes to a more definitive end all be all for the English meta, I use Eggman Events, ran by Eggman himself, which is another YouTuber. He covers a couple of different games, but we care about Digimon here.
Mostly Bandai covered games, yeah.
Yeah, he does mostly Bandai games, and Digimon being a Bandai game, he has some of the best metadata, because he pretty much has almost exclusive rights to the metadata. Because I have talked to TOs about getting their metadata before. They are very selective on who they want to give the data to, and they do have to ask Bandai what they're able to give based on who is asking. So Eggman, having pre-established communications and connections with Bandai from his Dragon Ball days, he is basically he has free reign over getting almost whatever information he wants from the tournament side of things, as long as it doesn't break like some terms of service, which they generally wouldn't give him the information to do that to begin with. But that's where we get all of our top 16 breakdowns from all of the different events from literally all of the different regions. So if you want like the English hardcore data, this is where we go to get that data. And then what I do from there is I take Eggman's data of the top 16s. I have an Excel spreadsheet that I throw all of the data in, and I further compute like where the meta is for each of the different decks. So like when I'll talk about like a deck, like, oh, Shine Greymon is 31% of the meta, I'm referring to the meta as in what was actually able to get into top 16, because that's something I can actually quantify based on all of the information that Eggman is laying out. So that lets me see the range on how well and successful a deck is able to do based on all of the different events in each of the different respective metas. And Eggman's really nice about putting deck lists up. So he uses Digimon IO, I believe, Digimon Card IO.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of databases. The big ones are Digimon Card IO, Digimon Card.dev, and Digimon Card.app. Those are the three big databases for both deck building, deck sharing, and just looking at cards.
Yeah, I don't think there's any more that I really look through. It tends to be DigimonCard.dev. It's a fantastic resource, and same with our card.io. Just to You can also look at other people's decks. Like people just put up decks, and you can get your baseline lists. Maybe you're trying to figure out a core for a deck. You look through a bunch of different decks. They also show, of course, leaks. Some of the newer cards. And if you're running on I guess another resource would be like testing resources, but that's like via like T or what's this application called?
It's like Project
Tabletop.
Yggdrasil. Yeah, there's
No.
Project Yggdrasil, which is like a new
Mhm.
online one. I'm waiting for that to be further fleshed out before I even attempt to use it,
It
because right
looks
now
nice.
it plays kind of rough.
It's more so like I don't know if you know.
Untap,
No. I don't like Untap.
because was the one that I was using for just web browser alone. Just because sometimes I don't like TTS's shuffler.
Yeah, I prefer TTS just because it's the simplest one to use and it has the automated functions, which is nice.
Yes.
Um, but it's kind of like oh my god, what is that Yu-Gi-Oh one? The one that's not automated, but it has some automated features um, that most people use when they play. I can't remember what the Yu-Gi-Oh one is, but it's the Yu-Gi-Oh equivalent, but Digimon's Yu-Gi-Oh equivalent to that. And it's essentially you have to manually do all the effects yourself, aside from some things like shuffling and drawing and all these other things that you have to input commands for. I think he's right, though. I do think it needs a little bit more fleshing before I start trying to use it a bit more. But I do like the shell that's there. That's also just a good resource. Those two, tabletop and that, and untap, as he said, those are just resources to test cards that we don't currently have for like future metas and things like that.
Yeah, they're all
Um,
manual, by the way. There's no
yes,
like hardcore 100% automated one.
unless
And
you're counting the app, but can't
yeah,
the
uh,
app.
I
The
mean,
app
that's
only
just a
has starter
tutorial.
decks.
Yeah, that's just a tutorial app. Which if you are new, download the
Download.
tutorial app. It does a good job at teaching the very bare bone basics, but there is just a lot of stuff to learn outside of that. So you would probably want to use all of these different resources to not only just study up, but like watch. Because something that I think we haven't really touched on is like streamers. Like, there's a decent amount of Twitch streamers that play Digimon and play it on a regular basis, or just are the occasional I stream the event because I'm playing in it type people. So like there's just a lot of ways to be able to absorb content in the Digimon card game, and it is just finding who works best for you and what you're looking for as far as the use of YouTube and Twitch.
Correct. I do think there's plenty of great content creators out there. And it really is just, like he said, what it is you're looking for specifically. You're looking for specific content, like regarding, oh, I only want to know about the meta. There's a subgroup for that. You want to look at gameplay, there's a subgroup for that. Podcast format, there's a subgroup for that. I mean, there's plenty of it out there. And if you wanted to ask, you're more than welcome to drop it in the comments, see what other people think, because I'm hoping other people drop other resources. Maybe there's resources I don't know about. I would like to see. You guys let me know in the comments.
Well, I mean, some of the like more basic resources that people still sometimes don't even know exist is literally the website that Digimon uses to give you information. So that is
Digimon World. Yeah.
world.digimoncard.com. And if you go to EnglishDigimonCard.com, that's actually the Japanese side of things. You want to go to world.digimon.card or World.digimon.card worlds.digimoncard.com. Gosh, too many
Yeah, they got an
dots.
awful name for the website, by the
Yeah,
way.
so but regardless, that is the official Bandai website to give you all of the information. You could see set releases, set breakdowns, you could see what cards are in each of the sets, and like they even started giving you some like sample decks and highlighting points on various different products. That's where you go to look up rules, for look up what events are going to be happening, both big and what's going to be small term. When you're looking for specific events, when it comes to the small ones, you're actually going to have to use the Bandai TCG Plus app, which that also is technically a resource if you're just looking to try to find something in your general area. So there's just a lot of untapped resources. There's always different Facebook pages and Discord groups, and then there's Reddit. For basically anything you could ever want. There's like rules, there's judges, there's like just a whole bunch of good people willing to communicate for the most part to help you get to where you want to be. But don't overuse it when it comes to like some of the silly little stuff. Like, what's the difference between on play and when Digivolve? You could easily just go to the wiki and read like each of the keywords, and you could probably, between that and watching a gameplay video or something, piece those answers together yourself. And like, I do think there is a huge influx of silly questions. They're not bad questions, they're just silly questions because they've already been answered to death somewhere else. And just a quick simple search function in any of those like groups or resources usually can help you find exactly what you're looking for without the need of, looking a little bit silly. But this brings us to our last point. But before we transition, do you have any other resources that we should know about that you use that I don't?
I'm sure you've used it before, and you kind of mentioned it without necessarily mentioning it. But Bandai has their own FAQ, literally, like a whole massive document that has literally all the FAQs that they've ever done. So uh, that is also one. I think it's if you just type in Digimon
I
TCG
know the
FAQ.
FAQ gets posted on the wiki,
Yeah,
but if it should be in the rules section on their like Bandai's website.
yeah, they have a specific thing. Like they have, I mean, the rules and manuals, which each one of those has different things. They have Q&A, the Q&A, and each for each specific set. So if there's something you're looking for specifically, this is on Digimon Global, the world.digimon.com. Um, uh, and they're literally Q&As for every single set. So usually, if a question has been asked, it's probably been answered via those. Um, or, I mean, you could just log into the Facebook groups. There's literally a judge group specifically on Facebook. Um, like, there's a whole bunch of different things, as he stated before. The biggest one there that I was thinking was just that in particular, just because they have most FAQs set up, and you could just Control F, search whatever ruling you're looking for, and more often than not, you'll find it. Besides extremely niche scenarios, which more often than not they'll cover it, but they won't ever like throw it on the FAQ for some reason. But those are like the extremely weird scenarios that never happen unless somebody is trying to force something to happen.
Yeah. And usually, if something's not covered, that's usually when I would ask the question, just because it's not specifically laid out to all of the usual resources that I would go to. And, like, I think, like, just limiting down on some of the silly stuff and the repeated stuff would help be able to ask more and newer questions that haven't been there before. Because if a judge is like sitting there and typing in the same response every single time because this is the 17th time he's seen this question, like that's not helping anyone at all. Like it might help you specifically, but you also didn't do the due diligence on seeing if somebody actually asked that same question. And that's just a new player thing, which I don't necessarily think is like that bad. It's just that's where knowing these resources is useful, so that way you don't have to look silly on trying to ask something that's already been asked, or finding something that you're wanting to know about the game just because you're starting. So that's kind of like why this discussion was really good, is because like there's just a lot of resources that people aren't either A, aware of, or B, using, and taking the time to highlight them just helps uh, you, the player, especially a newer player, get familiarized with everything that you would want or need in order to be as successful based on the type of player that you are. Which now this is the perfect point to transition into the last little bit, which is the different types of players. So I don't know if anyone is familiar with Magic the Gathering. They had an absolutely fantastic GDC video. I think that was like a 2012 video or a 2008 video. I don't remember. But it was Mark Rosewater's 20 lessons learned from Magic. And I think a lot of those lessons could be applied into various different other TCGs. One of them was player types. So there are a couple of different types of players. So this is where the whole Timmy, Jimmy, and Spike comes into play, if anyone's ever heard those terms. Timmy is basically the hyper casual. They just like big and exciting things, fancy foils and special cards, just because, that's exciting. Then you have the Jimmy or Jane, which is I like the creative aspect of TCGs. I'm using the TCG as a way to express my own creativity. Then you have your Spikes, which are the hardcore, dedicated, like tournament grinders deep into the meta and like the most competitive player that you could possibly be. And obviously, not everyone is exactly that one type. You could be like a Timmy Spike. You could be like a Timmy Jimmy. Like there's a lot of different combinations that you could be to define yourself as like what type of player you are. But this got me thinking, well, what if we take this a step further, or like zoom out the scope a little bit, and let's extend this to the 3 Cs. So the way I like to define the 3 Cs is a TCG enthusiast usually will fit into 3 different types of categories. The first one is the casual, the second is the competitive, and the third is the collector. So these are the pillars of a TCG community. So if you want to go into the competitive or the casual, that's usually like zooming in onto them. That's usually where the Timmy Jimmy Spike starts coming in. But I think the 3 pillars or the 3 Cs of a TCG is built upon the casuals, collectors, and competitive people, because those are, the 3 different types of people you're actually going to be engaging with when it comes to any TCG.
Interesting. So this is a topic that before you spoke about it, it's kind of not been in my head. Like I've been participating in TCGs for better part of 60 to 70% of my life. But never really once did I think about it in that way until I got a little bit older, and I never really had the terms you say to kind of put it, but I always thought about it in that aspect. And how, like, for example, me as a player, I'm like a baby collector, but realistically, I'm more of the casual / competitive player. So I could say I fit into all 3 categories because I do collect cards. I do have my special collection just for myself, that will never be touched. But predominantly, I'm here to play the game more often than collect. So I
Yeah.
guess if you wanted me to be like, oh, well, that doesn't count, then I would be those 2, less of a collector.
I mean, what really got me thinking about this partially was the RB1 debacle and who was it for. Just because it seemed like a great product that appeased almost nobody but the casuals, which I don't think is a problem per se. It's just, it really got me thinking about these 3 pillars and the fact that the TCG is great when they're in harmony, and the TCG is not great when they're at each other's throats. And I think RB1, the way it was handled, both from a community aspect and a Bandai aspect, it really just kind of made the pillars really seem to shake a little bit, because I don't want to be fighting with the casuals. I would consider myself more of a collector or a competitive player more than I would a casual. Like, I'll make casual decks, but I try to come from them with a more competitive mindset, where it's like, I'm not using this Digimon because I think it's fun. I'm using this Digimon because it serves a purpose to make the deck better. So I would label myself as a collector, because I do have my playset binder where I have a playset of all of the SRs and above, and I even have one for promos. It's not complete, but I have one. And then I do consider myself a competitive because of the content that I make, obviously discussions I tend to talk about, and the tournaments I tend to play in.
Yeah.
But when RB1 really came out and like rocked all three of those foundations, like, that's what really got me worried and what really got my gears turning on thinking about this, because I don't want anyone to feel bad, or like, I don't want to put anyone down if I could avoid it, just because that's not helping. And seeing the community be at such odds with itself over RB1 was something I really didn't enjoy. Like, more than my own personal disappointment from RB1, it was just how everything was handled from the community aspect that really also made me kind of sad.
I think that also just, not only does that fall under the, the whole idea of them being separated by whatever faction they wish to be part of, via collector, casual, or competitive.
And obviously
Um,
there's overlap.
of course, there's always people that bleed in between. Predominantly, I would say I bleed in between just about all three of them for the most part. But lean pay probably a little bit heavier into competitive than anything else. But um, I think that that volatility is just natural for the internet in a nutshell. Um, it also is just one of those things that, we know the Digimon fan base. Our Digimon TCG community is quite volatile. One day they're happy about one thing, the next day they're extremely upset about the other. And there's no real way to please everyone, so it was bound to happen. I mean, it happens. It's happened a few times beforehand in the past where people
Yeah,
are
but
very upset.
RB1 felt like
This
a
is
very
definitely the
special
biggest one.
case. Yes,
I
it felt
think
like
this
a
is
very
definitely the
special
biggest
case.
one, because you're right in the way that it really showed the divide, where you could see more often who was with whatever faction they were part of, um, or whatever group that they wanted to be associated with, which isn't necessarily a bad thing per se, but it's bad in the context of, well, you're wrong and this is good because of this. Well, no, you're wrong because this is the this. In reality, it was, no, you're both wrong because it's fine. The product was meant for specific groups of individuals, and the people that it was not meant for were not happy about it, which is fine. That is completely understandable. You are more than welcome to be upset about something that was not meant for you, especially because it's in the game that you are playing. At the end of the day, you're wanting the community, want to play this game. We want to buy the product. And if a product is lackluster, we more often than not should show that we are unhappy with said product.
Yeah,
But we also have to take into context what the product is,
and
and that
who's it
that
for?
matters.
Yeah, because
That's
the who's it for part really started getting me to think about these three C's. Is like, I studied marketing just because I had to for school, and like, I'm not a marketing expert or genius, but having a target audience and understanding what that target audience wants is one of the most important things when creating a product. And I feel like Bandai marketed RB1 to try to fit all three categories, but realistically only hit one of them. And I feel
Mhm.
like that's part of what caused the negativity and the great divide, and how everyone basically showed what faction they associate themselves with more based on the reception of RB1. And I'm not saying like trying to go back to RB1 is a problem. It's just it was just a very interesting case study, which is why I made like a small little documentary on the history of that set and its inception all the way up to its reception in both regions. And it's just a very unique case for the Digimon, not only card game, but community as a whole for the TCG, just because we have not seen anything like that before. And that's why I even like thought of the 3Cs, was because of this. And I was just like, okay, these are the three pillars to the community that make up a TCG. They're always going to be there in everything. And even though not every product is for everyone, you got to market and say who this is for a little bit more specifically. Because one thing I also learned in design school is always assume the worst out of your players, and always assume, like, I hate to say that they're all idiots, but like that's sometimes what
No,
we have to
you have
like.
to.
Yeah, we have to assume that everyone is an idiot when designing a product, and that's what goes into stupid proofing. So that way, you don't get the worst out of your products that you're not expecting people to use with, is because you stupid proof. But that's where good communication and good marketing comes in. And I feel like Bandai sometimes doesn't exactly have the best marketing when it comes to labeling who a product is for and what it's all about. And this extends more than just the Digimon card game. This also is like just a TCG thing in general. Not everyone is going to have perfect marketing on everything all the time. Look at Wizards. They just shove everything down everyone's throats and hope everyone buys it, and they're just whale hunting. They don't care who you are or what type of player you are. They're just hardcore whale hunting. They're going to be like, what can we do to squeeze the most money out of people? And I think companies like Bushiroad and Bandai, they're a little bit more targeted towards the communities or aspects that certain products are going to be going towards, which I think is fine as long as they communicate that a little bit better than what they have been.
I mean, I think they're not bad per se. I mean, we have specific examples where, well, I can think of one off the top of my head at least.
Well, that's the
Of
difference
a
between,
good example.
yeah, like a good example would be a starter deck versus an advanced deck.
Yeah,
An advanced
exactly.
deck is something players would want to pick up, play out of the box, and have the best time that they could possibly have. A starter deck, you're not going to get that. A starter deck is meant more for teaching, with a couple of good cards here and there that you might think about
To get you
utilizing.
started. That's the point of it. It's meant to get you playing the game as soon as possible. Whereas the other advanced deck is meant to get you into the competitive side as soon as humanly possible. So they're meant for different groups of audiences. You can use them both as the same thing, as teaching, and good for both. They're marketed. See, I think that's like where that shows it's a good product, because they're both good for getting new player into the game, but one is specifically marketed as, yes, this is very good out the box. You can just boom, go to a tournament and play.
Yeah.
That's, at least that was the intention of the product, which you could do with the Beelzemon one, to be honest. Now you'd have varying degrees of success, but if you went with it to a local, you'd probably be fine if you played it right. Um,
Yes.
so it, and I do agree, Bandai needs to work on just how they present their materials, because sometimes it they leave room for interpretation, and that interpretation is what messes them up, or that's what causes outcry. Instead of just saying, boom, this is the product, boom, this is what's there, boom, here's everything involved with the product. But they do like sprinkles of information, like, oh, this is coming. Well, what day is it coming? Well, that's going to be told later down the line. Don't worry about it now. Well,
Yeah,
okay, well, what's in the product? Oh, that's told later down the line. Don't worry about it. Well,
and to go back about resources, usually we find out before Bandai even makes an announcement via distributor websites or Japanese announcements. So like there's already preconceived notions based on what is being presented to us to the distributors. And that preconceived notion, on top of like any other spoilers, lets us know like what this type of a product is. Like EX sets, as an example, they were first marketed as like something more than what they actually were, and that's why EX1 did absolutely poorly on the secondary market. Everyone overbought that set, and that set was so underpowered, it was ridiculous. And it's the cheapest booster box we have currently because of that issue, because it wasn't properly communicated what this product was. Then we learned with EX2, EX3, and EX4 what the
They're
product
supplement.
actually was, and our expectations changed accordingly based on what was given to us. Sometimes EX sets are a little bit better, like EX2 and about to be EX5, and then sometimes they're kind of mid, like EX3 and EX4. But the fact that an EX set is not supposed to be like this big end all be all meta defining game changer, it's supposed to slightly shift or tweak things a tiny bit, is the whole intention on it. But they're not communicating that effectively enough. And I think that's like a very unfortunate thing, especially since like players are sometimes confused by what a product is. Like, what's the difference between a BT, an RB, a EX, a ST? Like, what do all these mean, and what do they stand for? And like that sometimes can be confusing, and sometimes this is where knowing what is being marketed towards who, what the expectation of the product is, that's all very important and relevant information that sometimes is a little bit hard to piece together unless you already are knee deep in Digimon and experienced it already.
That also goes back to knowing what resources to pull from, because understanding, like, for example, we know now, just because we've experienced it, and now we are a resource telling you guys BT sets are your main sets, RB sets are going to be your reprint sets, EX sets are going to be the supplemental sets. They usually bolster already existing archetypes while bringing in a slightly, maybe an okay archetype, usually here and there. So it's like now with the resources we have, we can make educated guesses on what it is these products are going to be. But why do we have to make educated guesses when they could just be like, okay, well, EX sets are meant to be supplemental sets.
Yeah, EX sets are more for the casuals. BT sets are more for the competitive. RBs are, I guess, kind of for the collectors, but they're also for the
Collector and
casuals as
casual.
well.
Yeah. So it's like they, instead of us having to make these interpretations, they could just tell us outright what these are for. And that would alleviate, I assume that would alleviate a lot of the problems the community has with how Bandai releases stuff. Um, and I think it would solve a lot of the problems I have, which there's not that many. I honestly don't think it's that bad, but I also am just going to consume anything that they produce for the most part, unless I just vehemently am against it, which is very, very far and few between. But that's just me. So take it from someone that's not a whale in regards to playing the Digimon TCG, just because I want to play on a competitive aspect. But if you're looking from the outside in, as like even as maybe a casual looking to get a little bit dip your toes in, then understanding what resources to use is pertinent. It's very, very important, and it allows you to make good financial decisions going forward. Not that this game is very expensive, but you never know. Some people, like for example, the people that bought into a lot of the people that bought into R or EX1, he brought up that example, uh, how they got burned very quickly because the set was not good. But they would never have known that. Now that we see the leaks and things like that, now we can kind of get an idea as to what we should be investing into, at least from the competitive aspect. So it's not so bad anymore. But early on sets, we weren't getting those leaks as heavily. as we are now because the game just wasn't as popular.
Yeah, and from a casual aspect in terms of leaks, they still do English leaks.
Yeah.
Over on like their Twitter, the English Twitter and the English Facebook page, they still do those leaks. In case you're not like wanting to look up in a database what BT14 has, so you still have that avenue to have that slow drip and excitement on reading the cards for the first time in an official source. So like they don't take that away from you if you're new and just learning.
It's just very interesting. I like that you brought up this topic because it's very it's divisive. It's one of those weird topics that, of course, is never really brought up. Um, but there's a lot of nuance to it depending on what avenue you're looking at predominantly. So it's very cool. And as long as we as a community are looking at it on a healthy aspect, respecting each other, because you can like and experience the game in whatever way you wish to experience the game, as long as you are not outright harming other people. Um, I think it doesn't really matter which way you are consuming it, because as long as you are consuming it, the game thrives. Um,
And that's my big takeaway as well. The three pillars are meant to be just that. They're pillars. They're supposed to hold up and support the game, and we're supposed to support each other to support the game that we all love and want to play. We're not supposed to try to be at odds and ends with each other just because Bandai decides to be Bandai and miscommunicates things or doesn't communicate their intentions properly. And like we have to grow and learn past that as a community in order to come out stronger on the other side. And that literally this is what got me like thinking about all of this was because I didn't like how RB1 was handled on any front. That should be no surprise to anyone. But the good of it is what can we learn from the experience going forward? And me examining this type of perspective on community definitely was something that I wanted to address and definitely something that I wanted to learn, on top of just helping others with the proper resources to be able to get them to be in the spot of the community that they want to be in, because they're new, they're learning, but some are more experienced than others in various different aspects. So I just it was just something a little bit off brand and unique that I don't see a whole lot of people actually talk about.
well, I appreciate it. I think it was very interesting to hear how you look at them and kind of get a little bit of a dig into your mind as to what it was that was bothering you about this whole ordeal. And I do agree, we as a community need to grow. This is something that we should not be at odds. It should be, we at the end of the day, we're all part of the player base. It
Yeah.
should be a unified front.
And
If
the
we don't like
band's
what Bandai's doing, we need to unify rather than separate and pinpoint and be like, you're the problem, you're the problem, you're the problem. At the end of the
and
day, we're all the problem.
Yeah,
But
and this extends to the ban and restriction list as well, because I knew that was a pretty hot one as well. Because people were just like, oh, why'd they limit this card that just got reprinted? It's just like, well, they didn't plan on that when they reprinted the card, but
it's
like,
forever ago
but
that this
certain notes of the ban and restriction affect each of the different pillars a little bit differently. So like that again is the same type of recognition on why knowing which pillar you fall more towards and what these announcements do to each of the pillars, understanding that helps be able to support the pillar and in not a negative way, and understand the perspective of other pillars. Because while some people think, oh, they hit purple really hard, purple bad, ice bomb package in the garbage, my deck is dead. No, that's not
probably
necessarily true from a competitive perspective. You'll grow past it. Like, yes, okay, seeing your favorite card that was semi broken get hit, yeah, sure, that sucks, but it's not like they don't leave us hanging without any like substitution or like just trying to be creative and find those smart substitutions. That's part of the fun of it. And like, yes, sometimes it does negatively impact decks, sometimes it positively impacts decks, but that's the point. And the point is to understand that we can just move past it. And if the other pillars help support each other, currently, like what I see with the ban and restriction announcement, I lost this card, what's a good replacement? Well, there's people waiting and ready with
Yeah.
the answer. And I think that's the part that I like seeing, is us helping each other rather than us tearing each other down.
I enjoy that. That helps us evolve as players. And you'll never ever be able to figure out everything on your own. That's just not how this works.
And using
So
the resources can help also reduce the redundancy of said questions, but again, I digress.
yeah, that's I understand, someone from like another player maybe not wanting to be looking at it and would rather have someone's opinion rather than just looking at the cards. I understand that completely. But it never hurts to look at like a deck list and be like, okay, let me read these cards, understand, okay, why does this card exist in this deck? Cool. Rather than you tell me, hey, what should I replace for this card? Give me ask me why this card is in the deck and why it was so important. I think that's more impactful than you just saying, what's the replacement for the card? Because then that allows you to learn, okay, Eismon, for example, since we're talking about the bans and hits, Eismon getting hit means, okay, I'm no longer getting the draw 3, drop 2. Okay, why is that important? Most purple decks want to draw, filter, and then put cards into their trash. Being able to choose what you want in your trash is important. Okay, so we know why the card is important. Of course, that's just a baseline. That's not really the full aspect of why it's good, but that's the generic nutshell answer as to why the card is good. Drawing, seeing what pieces you need, filtering, putting the cards you don't need or want in the trash. And then, okay, what cards can I use to supplement that? Now you can look through the cards rather than me just tell you what cards. You can look through the purple options and see what's there. Okay, well, this card fills a similar niche, but maybe it does something extra or it does something slightly different. Example, Doberman does effectively the same thing, but allows you to recycle a card or Tamer if you wanted to. So it's little things like that that I think are more important and valuable as an experienced person trying to teach somebody newer. So if you are new to the game, look at that in that aspect. You are more than welcome to just say, screw it, I want a net deck. Tell me what the best cards are in each one. And I'm sure someone on the internet will be like, yeah, sure, I'll give you the deck list. Boom, give you a deck list. But I personally would behoove you to really understand as to why cards are in the decks and things like that. And use the resources available to you to learn those things. And that could be a person. You could ask a person. You could go on the plethora of websites that have the databases and things like that, or you can ask people via the forums and things like that, Facebook, Reddit, all these other avenues. Um, and there's plenty of ways and resources for everyone. There's bound to be the one that you like the most. But I would say sometimes break out of your comfort zone and try new things. It always helps and it evolves you both as a player and a person.
Yep. And I definitely want to echo that sentiment as well, because that's just important to any TCG. That's important to any community and any game in general, is being able to take all of that information and learn and grow with it, so that way you then can start helping other people learn and grow, and that's the cycle that we want. And I think right now we're actually in a pretty decent cycle. Even though, yes, we did just have two semi-negative things kind of happen with the RB1 debacle and the ban list debacle, I think we're in a good spot to move past those. And we are back into a growth cycle where we're wanting and willing to support each other again. help other people learn and grow. So I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast, please feel to share with others on various social media platforms, while also leaving a rating, review, follow, like, subscribe, whatever on said platform of your choice for whatever you're listening or watching on. And thank you again for listening, and we will see you next time.